And now our second guest on this Two for Thursday to talk about the three Big Ten players the Los Angeles Chargers selected is the host of Locked On Chargers, Daniel Wade. Joining us here on the Locked On Big Ten podcast, the Chargers going with three Big Ten talent now on the roster for the Chargers, a couple of offensive linemen, one very impactful, and one on the defensive side of the ball. So Daniel Wade, a pleasure to have you here on the Locked On Big Ten podcast.
Happy to be here, Ben, and definitely happy, with the Big Ten being represented now on the Chargers. I mean, I think all three guys, could have a role pretty early on for them. So it's very exciting.
And that first overall pick for the LA Chargers at number 13 overall, which I think was great value and who has tremendous upside, the offensive lineman out of Northwestern in Rashawn Slater. How would you grade that pick, Daniel Wade?
A+. I mean, home run. I think what also factors into it is just the fact that you stayed put. You didn't have to mortgage the future to go get the guy. And I mean, it's just not often in the first round that you can legitimately say, hey, we feel like we're getting the best talent available and also getting your biggest need. And I think for the Chargers' first two picks, there's an argument for it. I mean, even with Asante Samuel Jr., but with Rashawn Slater specifically, I mean, he was just never supposed to be there, right? I mean, Chargers fans were just like, Bengals, please take Jamar Chase. Like, don't start the offensive lineman run early and take Penei Sewell there and then, have him have to make it 8 more picks until the Chargers select at 13. I mean, for them to go into this knowing that was their number one need and to come away with Rashawn Slater, who, I mean, some people think is the best offensive tackle in this draft class. And for me, at least, is the most technically refined offensive lineman in this draft class. I mean, I literally don't think they could have asked for a better situation to fall into their lap.
One of the biggest pros about Rashawn Slater in this pre-draft process was his versatility and flexibility along that offensive line. And you would expect any first-round talent selected in the top 15 picks to probably be a day one starter. But I ask, where do you think he will slot himself on that Chargers offensive line?
I mean, it's easy. They have a big hole at left tackle. I think he's going to get the first crack at the job. I mean, the Chargers a couple of years ago took Trey Pipkins as a developmental piece in the third round, while Russell Okung was going to be the starter. That didn't work out for them, and now they left themselves with, Sam Tebby leaving for the Colts, them trading Russell Okung last year. The biggest hole on their roster right now is left tackle, although someone like Matt Filer, who they brought in from the Steelers, has some tackle flexibility, right? I mean, they could technically kick him out there. He's much better at guard, and Rashawn Slater, even with the shorter arm length, I mean, I don't have any, qualms about him going out there and getting the first shot at left tackle. I mean, I think he honestly takes the job and runs with it. I mean, I think the talent disparity between him and the next guy just coming in, as technically refined, as good as he was in, the Big Ten, especially when you get to see him go up against guys like AJ Epinesa and Chase Young and all of those guys. I mean, you've seen him do it against guys that have had success in the league already at this point. So for the Chargers, even though, I do think he could kick inside and be, Pro Bowl guard, I think the obvious spot for him to slot in and the place that he'll be week one when the Chargers open things up is their starting left tackle and hopefully their franchise left tackle for the next 10 years.
And if there are a bunch of Chargers fans now listening to this episode of the Locked On Big Ten podcast and you want to delight yourself on this Thursday, go to YouTube, type in Chase Young versus Rashawn Slater, the game from 2019 between Northwestern and Ohio State. You're going to absolutely love what you see. And I think, Daniel, one thing we can all agree on, Rashawn Slater's suit on draft night in Cleveland, Ohio was looking prime. I love the pattern. I love the coloring of it. It had the baby blue in it. So I think he was looking good, maybe sending a signal to the LA Chargers that, hey, come get me if I'm still available. And that they certainly did.
Yeah, they definitely did.
And the 5th round selection that the Chargers made, another offensive tackle, this time out of Nebraska, and Brendan Hymus, a guy that I covered when I was working in Omaha and covering the Huskers on a daily basis. What'd you make of that pick in the 5th round to get Hymus?
I mean, it definitely makes sense to double down on the offensive line for the Chargers. I mean, depth has been a huge issue there. Brian Bulaga was a prized free agent acquisition in 2020, but he ended up only playing about 40% of the offensive snaps for the Chargers. So that's an issue. And when you've had a systemically bad offensive line, it doesn't get fixed with just a Rashawn Slater, right? I mean, it's building for the future, continuing to add talent to the position. And I know that I was surprised the guy fell there. I mean, and especially after going back and watching him. And obviously, I think the durability is a huge part of it. 40 consecutive starts in the Big Ten is nothing to sneeze about, right? I mean, that's super, super impressive, especially starting there as a true freshman, having to burn his red shirt and all of those things, and more tackle guard flexibility. I mean, he has a guy that's under 33-inch arms, so the move to inside with, at guard would make a lot of sense at the next level, especially since, a guy who weighed in at under 300 pounds. I mean, you're not necessarily thinking that he has the body to be a guard at this point to just drive people off of the line of scrimmage, but the Chargers needed depth at both of those positions. You needed guys that tackle that could potentially develop and start for you down the road. Brian Bulaga's contract could be up after this season. That's where all the money is for them. So they needed to continue to invest there. And this is another guy that you think, hey, this guy might not only help us on the outside, but he could be a guy that has guard tackle flexibility. So we might have just beefed up the depth for the Chargers offensive line in more than one position, getting both potentially a guard and a tackle.
And that was a key for the Chargers, I would assume, trying to protect their biggest asset, and that being Justin Herbert, of course, the first-round selection and the NFL Rookie of the Year, if I'm not mistaken, on the offensive side of the ball, right, in 2020 as well.
Oh, yeah.
So that was the key. Got to protect your guy. Got to protect that quarterback. I know Rashawn was asked about it on draft night. He said he's ready for it. He's ready to take on that challenge. The third and final pick out of the Big Ten Conference that the Chargers went with in the 2021 NFL Draft was Nick Niemann, the linebacker out of Iowa. His brother Ben plays in the AFC West, Ben Niemann for the Kansas City Chiefs as well. Sixth-round pick, first pick of that sixth round. What did you make of the selection by the Chargers to get Niemann?
I mean, what I took it as was really emphasizing getting better on special teams. And I don't think that's necessarily the only role he's going to play. But, I mean, I would be lying if I didn't tell you I was shocked to see what that guy's relative athletic score was this year. I mean, the guy absolutely blew it out of the water at his pro day. And, I mean, you see that, and you see the Chargers having the worst special teams unit in 2020 by far in the NFL. I mean, one of the worst special team units that we've seen. At some point, you have to draft players specifically for that. And for the Chargers, I would also say that day one he comes in, he's a special teams player. I mean, that's where he's going to make his bread and butter. But at the same time, a couple of years ago with Drew Tranquill coming from Notre Dame, I mean, that's where he started. I mean, he had to play all special teams. He wasn't sniffing the field defensively, blocks a couple punts, really shows out on special teams. And now he's, slated to be the starting inside linebacker this year. So when I watched Nick Niemann on tape, I mean, I was surprised that he wasn't getting a little bit more hype. I mean, just because he might be a little bit smaller to play that position, but with the athletic scores and just his, instinctive abilities, I mean, the read and react, the filling the gaps, the discipline, I mean, that guy was almost never out of place. So I could see, especially with who the Chargers have right now, I mean, they have a big three of linebackers. They have Kenneth Murray, Drew Tranquill, and Kazir White. Those guys were all on the roster last year, and Nick Vigil and Denzel Perryman, guys that have left in free agency, still played major roles. So for the Chargers, yes, I think you're getting a guy that can come in and impact special teams from day one, but it would be naive to think that he's not going to find himself onto the field at some point just because of injuries, because of the depth they have at that position. And I think, it's hard because Iowa basically just had him drop into like a hook zone every single time lining up in like the nickel, So, it's hard to really know what you're getting from him. Pass coverage-wise, I think he had one career pass breakup, and it was a pick six, right? So, when he has the ball in his hands, he's dangerous now. But, I mean, you don't really know what you're getting him from that aspect. But just for a guy who comes in, knows everything, is a really intellectual player, knows where he needs to be, isn't going to come in and blow things for you and blow his assignment defensively. I think those are the kind of guys that you like to stash in the sixth round and say, hey, this guy is going to fly down the field like his hair is on fire, because running in a straight line is something he does very well. And he's also going to be a guy that might develop into something more for us and add depth at the position.
Nick Niemann was a third-team All-Big Ten selection in the 2020 football season. And like you mentioned, Daniel, his athletic scores at that pro day for Iowa left a lot of people thinking, oh, maybe this guy's a little better than we gave him credit for. A very Big Ten draft, in my opinion, out of the LA Chargers to go with two offensive linemen and a linebacker from Iowa. That's about as Big Ten as Big Ten gets. So a great, great breakdown of what those Charger selections now present for that LA organization. Three of them coming from the Big Ten Conference. And I know now, Daniel Wade, that we are going to flip the script a little bit here. But before we do that, I say thank you for coming on the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Incredible insight. And I look forward to following along with everything these Big Ten guys do for the Chargers in the coming years.
Absolutely, man. I'm excited to add some Big Ten beef to this team.